most federal employees think their retirement tax bill goes down in retirement. It doesn't. It usually goes up, and it goes up more than they realize. I'm Momodou Bojang, and today Seth and I are going to walk you through a real example of two federal employees, Paul and Ellen, with the same career, the same income, and completely different retirement tax bill. What separates them is one decision most vets don't even know they are making. Seth, good to be with you, my friend.
Yes, excellent. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, so you remember Ellen and Paul?
I do, as a matter of fact. Very distinct paths. And I know that what really separates them is the conscientiousness of taxes. So
yes.
Can we talk a little bit about, you know, the default path versus the intentional path?
Yeah, exactly. So in this scenario, if you recall, Paul is one of those people that probably you cannot convince him to put money into any other bucket except for the traditional, because he has this belief that why would he pay the taxes now? He has the belief that he's going to be in a lower tax bracket now. And then he in fact said, well, why would I pay the tax now? I could have that money work for me and then grow it in the account. So he believes that all his money, he's going to put it into the retirement in a TSP, but more like in the traditional TSP. Whereas Ellen, on the other hand, believed that, no, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I want to make sure that there's no surprise for me later on in the future. So she believed that she wants to put all of our money into the Roth, knowing that she's going to be paying taxes now. And then what happened to our paycheck? Paycheck actually goes down now because the taxes that's supposed to be in the account, she's actually paying that out now. So in other words, I'm going to pay them now, and that way in the future I don't have to worry about that. So I think if you recall, when we went through this scenario, fast forward, if you think about the account balance, Paul came into our office very, very excited. I think he has about $1.5 million all in the traditional. And then my favorite thing is like, you know, well, how much of this money actually belongs to you? What do you think he said?
All of it.
Yeah, all of it. Yeah.
So he looked about his silent partner.
Yeah, exactly. So he looked at me and it's like all of it, right? Which you know, we laugh about that because we see that all the time. Then the question is like, well, do you know there's a silent partner, right? So who is the silent partner?
Politicians.
Politicians, right? And then because what happens, because that money is not taxed, so now he would have to basically pay what tax on that money. And then Ellen, on the other hand, came in with slightly lower amount in the TSP because Ellen would have to basically pay, she was paying the taxes, so obviously the growth in the account is not as significant as what Paul did. But she has all of that money in the Roth now, and then she met all the qualifications, right? She met 59 and a half years old, and then she had that money in there for more than 5 years. So therefore, that money is what? Is all tax-free. Tax-free. And then, in essence, that money belongs to her. So when we did the model, we showed Paul, hey, by the way, with this $1.5 million over here, if you pay the federal taxes that Ellen paid, which is like, you know, 24%. If you pay 24% now, and then we looked at the balance, so the balance, what's left, is exactly the same balance as what? As Ellen's. Yeah. And then, so in this scenario, so in essence, they're all the same. They are the same place. He paid 24% in taxes. The balance is the same as Ellen's balance is, but this is the catch over here. Now, remember I asked him the question, I said, well, do you think the taxes are going to go up or they think they're going to go down? What do you think he said?
The same thing probably 99.99% of people say when we ask the question is they'll be higher.
Yeah, and when we look at it, say, okay, well, I think the tax is going to be higher. So what we did was we modeled and increased the taxes up to like 26%, and then say, so when we did that, his balance after taxes is less than what Ellen has in the account. And he looked at it like, and then he was quietly surprised for that, right? So we said, right, exactly. But the other catch here is that he is not factoring because Paul is married. So now he's paying at the rate of the marginal tax rate is at 24% now. But the one thing that he failed to realize is if God forbid in the future something happens to either one of them, either him or the spouse, what happens then?
Tax rates and tax bracket is compressed. Now you're filing as a single person, and that limit shrinks.
Yeah. And then when you look at that right there alone is a huge tax increase, right? And the funny thing is, and I looked at him, I said, well, unless you're going to file single or you're going to have to remarry again. And then guess what? The spouse did not like that, right? So he told me, no, I'm not going to marry again. I'm going to be single, stay single. So therefore, that alone is a higher tax bracket than that. So we see that all the time and try to educate people that, taxes, in my opinion, is the biggest misunderstood risk, right? But let's dig deeper into this. Why do people feel like they're going to be in a lower tax bracket, especially the federal retirees that we work with?
You and I have talked about this before. I don't like to use the word myth. It's just something that is a refrain that you hear often over and over again, which is, hey, save money on taxes now, put more of it to work in the market, and when you retire, in theory, your tax bracket will be lower because, of course, your pension and Social Security are not going to make up 100% of your salary. The problem with that is that it rarely pans out that way, as you and I both know, because nobody wants to lower their standard of living in retirement.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I don't know that I ever thought of it this way, but if you're not intentional about tax planning now, when you're working, even before you retire, are you really gambling that tax rates are going to be the same down the road?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they are. It's a huge gamble that they're making. So a lot of times the example that I like to do is to give them is, just imagine you and I are going into a business venture, right? Now, regardless, this is your tax and all that, so it's different, but follow me through this, right? You and I go into a business venture, and, I invest 80% into that business, and you invest 20% into the business, right? But you're telling me, Momodou, I don't have anything to do with the business now. You go run the business, and then when I need my money, that 20%, I'll come to you and ask for that, okay? But you're telling me that you have the right, when you come at that point, you have the right to say whether you want to increase that 20% or not, okay? And I'm basically going to go and then work hard to build this business up. If this business goes up to multi-million-dollar company, you think I'm going to take the risk? I'm not going to do that, because what guarantees me that you're not going to come in and say, hey, the business is growing now I want 30% instead of 20%, right? So I think that's the key. Most people don't understand this, but what they're doing is when they put money into a traditional retirement account, in essence, that's what they're doing, because they're deferring, thinking that they're going to be in a lower tax bracket later on, which always is not. It's not usually the case. Yeah.
It almost sounds like, you're signing up for a variable interest rate, on what you're going to be paying.
Yes. Yeah, it's like a balloon interest rate. They say, wait, you pay this much now, but then later on, it's going to balloon on you, that you have to pay that. But, well, now we might think that makes sense, but then when the time comes in, it becomes a lot of it becomes a big problem. Now, the other thing that I will also say why people believe that they're going to be in a lower tax bracket, because they happen to believe that, well, while I'm working, let's say, GS whatever, let's say you're making about $197,000. You're looking at, okay, well, that's very high. And then if you look at the tax bracket for most people, that probably puts you maybe like 22, 24% tax bracket, right? So they would say, oh, wow, that's very high. But I always like to tell people, compared to what though? Because if you look back in history, 24% is a lot less compared to back then. There was a time whereby 94% we pay in taxes in this country, right? So it'd be 24%, when you think about it, is not a whole lot, right? But this is the catch over here. So they're thinking that when they retire, the salary goes. Well, the salary will go, but that salary is replaced with what? 3 different things, right? That would be what? Their pension. They're going to get a pension for the rest of their life. And by the way, your pension is taxed, right, at the federal level. And then they're also going to get what? Social Security. Your Social Security at federal level is going to be taxed at some point. You can go to a state that doesn't tax that, but at some point it's going to be taxed. And then guess what's going to happen again when they hit what? 70 when they hit
75, of
75.
course.
And then what happens 75?
That's when your silent partner taps you on the shoulder and says, I want my cut.
Yes. And then now you're going to be forced to take what we call the required minimum distribution, the RMD. And that's what I call the forced income, because there's no choice. You have to take that money out. So now, all of a sudden at age 75, they're getting their pension, their Social Security, and on top of that, they have their RMD. So if you add those three together, in most cases, they end up making more money than they've ever made while they're working. And they get very, very surprised about that. And that's when people that have those TSP millionaires, that's when they'll come into the office like really, really angry, because now they felt like they have been misled by the government, because they felt like they worked so hard to put money into this account, and now all of a sudden they're going to be taxed heavily on that. And so we see this all the time, right? What's your feedback on people that are out there looking to put money just into the traditional?
Well, I'm like you. I believe that everything we do in preparation for retirement, it should be intentional, right? And that includes tax planning. I think people tend to think about tax planning in terms of this year. And I've heard you say this very often, right? You go to your tax preparer, their job is to save you money on taxes this year. If you have to owe money 2, 3, 4 years in a row, you're going to fire that tax preparer. But the truth of the matter is, very often, especially when we're planning for retirement, it makes a lot more sense to eat a little bit of tax now while you're working, while you have steady income, to make things a little bit easier and guarantee that later on, you're not going to get bitten by this potentially runaway tax bill if you have that confluence of higher taxes, because we know there are many reasons why taxes might go up, and RMDs, the required distributions. That's like the worst case scenario that we want to ensure that folks don't find themselves in.
Yeah. It's funny because when I remember when we showed Paul that scenario, what he has to pay, his retirement tax bill. So when we talk about retirement tax bill, well, one of the things that we can do in the office over here to be able to show you when you reach your retirement, your minimum retirement age, for some people that might be 73, some might be 75, but when you hit your required minimum distribution age at 75, and we can model to like up to age 90, we can show you how much your retirement, how much taxes you will pay during that time frame. Now, the only thing that we can model to show them is if you pay that RMD, if you pay tax on that RMD, then whatever money, or how much is left, then you have two choices. Either you put that into a bank account or you could invest it. Well, when you turn around and invest that into some sort of like a brokerage account, you get the dividends from that as well. So that could create like tax issues as well. Now, we'll be able to show you from 75 all the way to age 90 what that tax situation is going to be. And guess what, though? When they're no longer here, well, that money goes somewhere else. Right? And then the kids will have to, if they have kids or whatever it is, unless it goes to charity, but if it goes to somebody else, they'll have to pay tax on that. And if they pay tax on that, we'll be able to show them what their tax is going to look like. So if we add those three taxes together, we look at that, we call that as your retirement tax bill. And in most people, that could even be potentially bigger than what they currently have, and they could not comprehend that.
I love your quote. I know it comes from the judge, but about, the difference between the minimum amount of tax you have to pay and the maximum amount of tax, or the what we call optional taxes. Can you tell me again?
Yeah. So I tell people, I said, you know what, there are two tax systems in this country, one for the informed and one for the uninformed, and they're both legal, right? So one of the things that we like to do is we're trying to challenge our clients to help them to get onto the informed side of tax, right? That way they can make right choices and then be able to do that, because I love that when we show them to say, hey, this is your required taxes. If you pay the tax today, this is what the politicians are screaming at you to say that This is how much you owe us with taxes. So that's your required taxes. The things that they do, the lack of planning that they do, we're able to show them what their choices are. So the difference between the choice that they make and then their optional taxes over here, their required taxes, that's what we call the optional taxes. And that amount could be significant. That's when we turn around and say, that's what you basically chose to kind of like put what, to give to the politicians. And they don't like that. Right?
You opted in. And I think if I'm seeing or hearing a through line here, obviously there's the intentional path, and then there's the unintentional consequences of not being informed and not taking action in a proactive way to limit your lifetime tax liability.
Yeah. And you know what? We think about it. We're talking about taxes, and some people will probably say, well, why does it matter? It matters a lot because a lot of times when people come to us for retirement planning, oftentimes they would say, hey, I don't want to put all of my money in the stock market. They don't believe in putting all your eggs in one basket, which makes sense. Because who wants to put all their retirement assets in one basket, in one stock? We don't want to do that. Now, the reason why they don't want to do that, because if the stock market goes down, it's going to affect your retirement portfolio, right? So you try to protect it from that. But one thing that we don't do is to apply the same reasoning, the same standard to taxes. Because if taxes goes up, then your portfolio value will have to be what? Will be lower. You get to keep less. If taxes goes down, then you get to keep more. So in essence, we need to think about that. And that's why I call it the biggest misunderstood risk in this country, because people don't understand it. And the other thing, I know, people come to us and they say, oh, I'm going to be in a 24% tax bracket. I will always ask, what does that mean? When you say you're going to be in a 24% tax, can you explain that to me? And you know what they think? They think they're going to pay 24% in every single penny, right? What they fail to realize is the 24% a lot of times is more like the marginal. That's the highest tax rate. But sometimes there's something called the effective tax rate, what they actually pay. So when you show them the effective tax rate, it's usually better for them to make sense, makes sense for them to kind of like do certain strategies out there, right? Rather than basically waiting. Yeah. So it's fascinating. I mean, we can go on and on and on. I enjoy tax planning. I think, it's profoundly important for any person that's going into retirement. Granted, we're not providing any tax advice over here. We are just doing tax planning strategies for our clients. So, if somebody's looking at this video and if this kind of like makes sense to you, you feel like, oh my God, Momodou and Seth are talking to me, reach out to our office. We're more than happy to sit down with you and then be able to guide you through our tax planning strategies. That way you get to keep more of that money, because you know what? I honestly believe that you work hard for this, right? Maybe for your career, if you're a federal employee, maybe 20 or 30 years of your career, the DMV area, traffic, you have to deal with all of that. Sometimes maybe you might not even like your coworkers or your work environment, right? But with all of that, you're stuck in there and then basically build this wealth for you. So now it's your opportunity going into retirement to have a team like us to be around in your corner, that we can help you to make a smart and confident choices so that you can enjoy that profound retirement. What do you think, Seth?
I can't wait to have more people come in here and get informed, get smart, and get to work on a retirement plan. If there's one thing that I think I've learned from you, not just learned from you, but I think that just the attitude of like, hey, the longer you delay, the more your opportunities are going to shrink. Yes. And in fact, we talk about this in the workshops, that nobody ever looked back and said, man, I'm glad I waited to plan, right? It just doesn't work that way. The sooner that you can get ahead of these issues, the better off you are. And the more that you can head off unintended consequences like we were talking about. And I think the legacy piece is probably worth a whole other video, but this is where, as much as those eye-popping when we do that tax analysis and say, hey, here's the minimum, here's what you're opting in to pay, is when they realize what the effects will be on their beneficiaries, if it's their children or if it's, you know, other loved ones. Like, you're not leaving behind a blessing. You're leaving behind a mess and a tax bill for your heirs to have to figure out.
Yeah, there you go. And just to be clear, I mean, I think, you know, it can go both ways. There are people that will come to us and will probably say, hey, maybe you don't need that tax planning piece. You know, it could be somebody who's single, they don't have any beneficiaries. If the money is going to go to charity, then you know what? Why take the taxes now? Well, because when you can pass to charity and then they don't have to pay tax on that. So in that scenario, maybe it makes sense to not do that. But if that's not your situation, tax planning is extremely, extremely important.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Because everybody's situation is unique. Yeah. And this is where we say, be careful of the water cooler chatter. As what's right for one person is not necessarily right for the other.
And you know what we always say when we do this retirement workshop, we'll say, you know what, there's somebody out there at the water cooler who is talking. If you don't know anyone, it's probably you, right? But that's my way out. That's my little joke in there. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if this makes sense for you, tune out to look at our next videos and then like our videos, because this is where we spread our message so that we can profoundly impact the retirement for the federal retirees in the DMV area. Thank you very much. I'm Momodou Bojang. Take care.